Ray wrote such lovely, simple, family-friendly stories. Servus Freunde, my name is Jimmy Cage and Ray is a brand new Hindi language Indian anthology series that was just released on Netflix. It was created by Sayantan Mukherjee and contains of 4 episodes, each one about an hour long and each one based on a short story by the legendary Bengali filmmaker Satyajit Ray. This year marks his centenary, and if you are new to the channel, we have been reviewing many of his great films throughout the year and we will continue for the rest of 2021. But Ray wasn't just a great filmmaker, he was also a great author. With Feluda and Professor Shonku, he has created 2 of the most beloved characters in Bengali literature, and he has written dozens of short stories as well. And 4 of which have been adapted for this new Netflix web series. And they have been adapted in a very modern and quite different tone from their original material. Which honestly isn't really a surprise at all and I think also totally fine. Ray's short stories have a very specific charm to them. They are usually quite simple but at the same time really profound. And they almost always have a certain light-hearted and very humanistic comedic touch to them. The particular stories, their little twists and turns and their overall messages have been transferred over to these short movies. So you could say that the essence is still there. At the same time, the tone here is quite different. In 2 cases much darker and more gruesome, and the series is really not aiming for a family audience. The filmmakers have created their own modern interpretations, and with that being said, I think they did a pretty good job and I pretty much enjoyed all 4 films quite a bit. In order to make this review as quick as possible for you, I just sat down and watched all 4 episodes in one sitting. Which maybe isn't the best way to do this, but it was for sure a really fascinating and fun experience. The storytelling and filmmaking, the cinematography, editing, the acting and the music, all 4 episodes are of very high quality and not a single one of them is dull or boring. What I find a little bit of an odd choice though is that the 4 episodes were directed by 3 directors. Why not 4? Srijit Mukherjee, whose Chotushkon we already reviewed in the past, did the first 2 episodes, which are also the darkest ones. Forget Me Not tells the story of Ipsit Nair, a successful businessman who apparently never forgets anything. But right in the beginning he meets a young woman who tells him about a shared experience that he for some reason has no recollection of at all. It is based on Ray's short story Bipin Chowdhury's Lapse of Memory, which was first published in Bengali in 1963. It's only 10 pages long and really rather innocent, which can't be said about Forget Me Not, which can be described as a gripping psychological mystery thriller. The filmmaking is very slick and effective. It paints an atmospheric, neo-noir-like urban atmosphere, and our protagonist's declining mental health, as he's beginning to question his own memory and insanity, is shown in a really gripping fashion. I think it portrays Ipsit just enough as a human being who is deeply flawed but also not villainous, and at the same time gives you these genre treats. Ali Fazal gives a very strong performance and there are some great filmic touches to it, especially the whole finale that very expressively, in one long continuous shot, brings all the narrative threads together. I think stories and movies that deal with subject matters like memory, the human mind, truth and illusion are fascinating, and this one took the basic premise from Ray's short story and very effectively transferred it to our times. And the little Drishyam reference was of course also very fitting. So for me, Forget Me Not was quite a good opener and it's probably my second favorite episode in the series. Srijit Mukherjee's second episode, Barupiya, on the other hand, is easily my least favorite. It's still decent enough, but in this one something was missing for me. The characterization of our protagonist and his conflict were portrayed in a too simplistic and also unclear manner. It is based on Ray's short story Burupi, but unfortunately this is the only one of the 4 that I haven't read before, so I can't say much to the differences and similarities. Though I'm pretty sure there are plenty, and probably again mostly when it comes to the overall tone, because this one can almost be called a psychological horror drama, a little bit in the vein of Todd Phillips' Joker. It tells the story of a middle-aged, socially outcast makeup artist who begins to use makeup and prosthetics to assume other identities and get back at those he feels have wronged him. It's a dark revenge drama and there's also somewhat of a fantastical element to it. It honestly reminded me more of a Stephen King kind of story than Satyajit Ray. KK Menon gives a very subdued performance and there are some great images. For example, the protagonist walking through these dozens of pigeons to encounter a spiritual leader. But it never fully grabbed me and I was a little bit lost or uncertain about this man's true motivations and goals. And it's also really hard to sympathize too much with him. But nonetheless, I still liked it. The third episode, Hungama Hai Kion Barpa, was directed by Abhishek Chaubey, whose Uttar Punjab was one of the first Indian movies that I reviewed on the channel. It's based on Ray's short story Barim Bovmik's Ailment, which was first published in Bengali in 1973. Not only was this my favorite episode of the series, but it's also the one that is most faithful to the original story. The characters are very close to their written originals, the story beats mirror the source material with only some minor variations, mostly regarding the ending, and the tone is also quite lighthearted and optimistic. It also features two absolutely wonderful performances by Manoj Bajpayee and Gairaj Rao, who play two strangers on a train, who are actually not really strangers because they have traveled on a train together 10 years before. But it's only Manoj Bajpayee's character Musafi Ali who recognized the other one, which puts him under tremendous stress because 10 years ago he has stolen that man's precious watch. This episode is just so delightfully told and presented. It's mostly just these two men sitting opposite of each other in their train department. But we get both encounters, 10 years ago and now intercut, and also some nice and sometimes even surreal little cutaways to fully tell this story. There's a lot of charm and flair to it, the daydreams of our protagonist, the ticking clock sounds that are incorporated into the background music, and like I said, the performances and the chemistry of the two stars are wonderful, as is the message in the end. The fourth and last episode of the series is simply titled Spotlight, exactly like Ray's short story from 1983. It was directed by Vasan Bala, whose last film Maat Ko Daad Nahin Hota we also reviewed on the channel. This one was another winner for me, certainly the one that was most out there and that made me laugh the most. And probably also the one that took the biggest liberties adapting the source material. This one is really only inspired by Ray's original story, in which a group of people is visiting a man who claims to be over 120 years old and whose peculiar tale takes the spotlight away from a famous actor who happens to be visiting the same village. That actor is really only in the background of the story, but in this adaptation it becomes his story. Vasan Bala tells his version of Spotlight as an entertaining satire in which the rising and simultaneously struggling actor Vic, played by Harshvardhan Kapoor, is fighting for attention and his own self-esteem against a mysterious god lady named Didi, who is only acting in the background for most of the movie, but her many followers are all the more prominent. The entire movie is set in a hotel, and it's frankly quite hilarious to see how Vic is first thrown out of his room, to give it to Didi of course, to then losing even the people around him to the strange charm of that lady. In Ray's original story, it was the made up stuff about the possibility to live way above 100 years that fascinated the people. Here, it is the spiritual, religious mumbo-jumbo of a self-proclaimed goddess. It is her divine glance that captures the masses, which is juxtaposed with Vic's one iconic look that let his fans lose their minds. Spotlight is quite funny, let alone through the great editing and the absurdity and criticism of people's blind beliefs, which is poignantly visualized through the blue color on the foreheads of Didi's followers. While Hungama Hai Kion Barpa has some classical singing, this one is the only episode that features some actual songs. And again, it's quite funny how the song of Vic's latest movie, Ruk Ruk Ruk, is juxtaposed or suppressed by Didi's theme song. Harshvardhan Kapoor gives a nice performance as this man who is about to lose it all, and the film is wild, bizarre and just fun. It also throws some very flagrant Ray references at you, in one scene literally shouting out some of his movie titles. Towards the end, I was a little bit disappointed how Didi's storyline progressed, but it was alright. Overall, it was still a very entertaining episode and a good showcase for what you can do when adapting pre-existing material. And I think this is also my biggest takeaway from the series, and probably also a factor that determines how much people will like or dislike it. If you see it mainly as a love letter to the legendary Satyajit Ray, it might not appeal that much to you because it is very different and doesn't even try too much to reproduce that Ray magic. But if you understand it as a tribute that takes his stories and interpret them in a new and sometimes bold light, you can have a lot of fun with it, and it's also not just mindless entertainment, but still a meaningful depiction of the human condition. So in German I'd say, Ray nimmt 4 Kurzgeschichten des Meisters und verpackt sie in ein neues, teilweise äußerst düsteres Gewand. Bei einer Ausbeute von einer richtig tollen, 2 guten und einer ganz brauchbaren Episode wäre ich auf jeden Fall daran interessiert, in Zukunft noch weitere Adaptionen in diesem Format zu sehen. I give Ray 8 out of 10. It's more like 7.5, but I don't do that.
I'm better and better and better and better!
Alright, that's it. Like always, comment below and let me know what you think about Ray. Which one was your favorite episode, which one your least, and do you think it's appropriate to adapt Ray's stories in this way? You can hit me up on Twitter, Instagram and Letterboxd, and also on Patreon simply at The Jimmy Cage. And if you enjoyed this episode, please give me a thumbs up, share, subscribe, whatever you like, and make sure you hit that bell for all I have to tell.